Are you willing to accept Christ's invitation to know Him more intimately, love Him more intensely, and follow Him more closely, and then go out into the world and live His good news? If you say yes, then you could be the 13th apostle. Join Dan Duddy and Tom Caffrey, the odd couple of Catholic radio, as they ride the radio waves 2 by 2 to share the goodness, beauty, and truth of Jesus Christ and His church. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the 13th apostle.
Japan, Catholicism, and the second bomb. Welcome back, friends, to another episode of the 13th Apostle. This is Tom Caffrey with my co-host Dan Duddy. And joining Dan and me is our old friend.
It's not that old.
Jim Mulvihill, formerly Dan's high school football teammate and currently my fellow parishioner at St. Mary's Parish in southern New Jersey. Hiya, Dan, and welcome back, Jim.
Hi, Tom. Welcome back, Jim. Always a teammate. Don't listen in.
Good to see you. Good to see you, Dan.
Good to see you, too. Good to see you, Tom.
Teammates.
Yep.
Okay. Quite a heading there. I saw an article in the National Catholic Register, ncregister.com, with that title, Japan, Catholicism, and, well, that's our title. It's the gist of that story in the Register. The title of that article is Nagasaki's Continuous Martyrdom, From the Hidden Church to the Atomic Bomb, by Victor Gaetan, published at ncregister.com. So, certainly the three of us and those, the baby boom generation, hopefully everybody who's had at least high school history. I don't know if they don't require that anymore in a lot of schools, right, Jim?
That's correct. Yeah.
Unfortunately, you were a history major in college, right?
That's correct.
So at least some people, probably all our audience, knows Nagasaki as they were the second city bombed with the atomic bomb by the U.S. Hiroshima, obviously, being the first. In Nagasaki, 80,000 civilians killed. And what research I did for the program, I kept seeing the number 150 plus soldiers killed. So I don't know whether that means could be 175, but obviously it's nowhere near 60 to 80,000 of the civilians. And it was ordered. You talk about whether you got the short straw or you took it as an honor, but the man who ordered the bombing, General Thomas Handy, and I gave that preface there because he was at the time the acting Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, because General George Marshall was unavailable. So I don't know why General Marshall was unavailable, but you want to talk about your timing in life, where you're filling in for somebody, and oh, by the way, here's this. This is what the president has said. You're going to drop this. Now we know what happened in Hiroshima. We're going to do this again in another city. Now, when I read about General Handy, I didn't see anything about his faith. I did read that he had no qualms about that. He just really quickly filled out the form because I believe it was another general in charge of the Pacific. He was going to actually have to tell his pilot and co-pilot, whatever, you would know, Jim, but whatever their titles are in that plane, this is what you're going to do. And so he insisted upon receiving those orders in writing because he was going to do this on word of mouth, right? And so what really interests us is that the juxtaposition of having that type of weapon dropped on the most Catholic region, in the most Catholic city in Japan, at that time the Empire of Japan, certainly wasn't lost on Catholics at the time, certainly Catholic leaders. And it was Catholic because you had missionaries in the 17th century, maybe even earlier, but definitely the 17th century there, and converted. Now, I'm going to say it converted a lot of people. The maximum amount was approximately 200,000. Now, Japan's population is shrinking, but so is the Catholic population. So 200,000 is not a lot. But, one of the things that interested me about this article was that the thinking that goes into dropping this bomb on any city, certainly if you're Christian, if you're Catholic, how do you wrestle with that? But then what witnesses come out of this tragedy as can come out of any tragedy? And so I would say probably, Jim, you would be the better person to address the first question as to how you wrestle, or how you could imagine the leaders, the generals and whatnot, wrestling. Because there was no Air Force, right? And World War II was...
No, it was the Army Air Force.
Army Air Force.
They were the same branch, and then they split off after the war. Yeah, everybody, and I always found this interesting, is that people always gravitate to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And they neglect all that came before that. The fire bombings of countless. I think it was, I did a little research, I think it was 67 cities, in Japan, that took place long before the atomic bombs were dropped.
Great point.
And then you go to Europe. I mean, you were dropping bombs on Berlin and French cities, which were certainly Christian and Catholic. Somebody had to give those orders, and most likely they were Catholic or Christians who were giving the orders to their men, who were mostly probably Christians, to drop bombs on these cities. And it got to the point in the war where there were so many casualties that they were looking for a way to end this thing. When you're talking about specifically in Japan, the invasion of Japan, Tom, you had asked me yesterday, I think, if my dad had deployed to the Pacific, and they were training to jump into Japan. And the estimate of American casualties was in excess of 1 million.
Wow.
Because of the mindset. You understand, we fought our way all the way across the Pacific, and you'd land on an island, and there'd be 25,000 Japanese soldiers there, and they take 7 alive, because their code was not to surrender, not to give up. So they were going to fight to the death. This was going to be very costly. You go back to Europe and fire bombings that took place there. The Germans did it. We did it. The British did it. And it was specifically, for the most part, on non-military targets. They were trying to break down the civilian population, because that was, in the case of Germany, that was their workforce that were building their tanks and building their planes and building their munitions, and they were trying to wipe out the workforce. Same thing in Japan. They were firebombing Japan because what had happened was, when we had started doing strategic bombing in Japan, the Japanese, being intelligent people, spread out their manufacturing. It was no longer located specifically in Nagasaki or Hiroshima or Kobe. They moved it to smaller cities. Well, as soon as our intelligence figured that out, they figured, well, we've got to bomb, and that's why they firebombed 67 cities. And you have to understand, in Japan at that time, most of those homes were made out of paper and wood. And you drop some incendiary bombs, and
wow,
you're taking everything out. And the first one that they firebombed was Tokyo, and over 100,000 people were killed in Tokyo during the firebombing. The one firebombing. Okay, over 200,000 they think were wounded or displaced, and 16 square miles of the city just vanished, disappeared. I think we get too caught up in the atomic bombs. Maybe it's because of the suddenness of dropping one bomb and you're killing that many people. But far more people were killed by the fire bombings and by conventional weapons than were killed by atomic bombs in the Second World War. That was just a way to finally force the Japanese to surrender, to give in. And even after the second bomb was dropped, there was some in that cabinet that did not want to end the war. So it was going to cost a lot of American, a lot of British lives, Australians, So something had to be done. And when you're in that position, and it's 80 years ago, and your sensibilities aren't what they are today,
That last point you made is very important. This idea of presentism. We judge the past. What you just said, right?
We do it a lot in American history. We talk about the founding fathers. Oh, they're slave owners. Well, Tom, I've had this conversation with you. I don't know if I was a landowner in Virginia in 1750 if I wouldn't have had slaves. I can't tell you honestly, if that was the way that you got your labor. I don't know that. I would like to think I wouldn't have done it, but,
right.
Who knows? I don't know. I can't say that.
So, Dan, with the Catholic aspect here, I think, I did a search for the Catholicism in the various provinces and cities and regions and whatnot in Japan, and Nagasaki was 4.5% of the population, something like that. All the others were well under 1%. So it's a tiny percentage. But do you remember when we did an interview with Tom Heine and his book, The Song of Ascents? And one of the stories in there was about, this was Livingston, the explorer, and went throughout Africa, and he was a missionary. But the conversions in there and the suffering they went through, but especially that one, the little boy who was buried up to his neck, and then he was lathered with honey.
Mm-hmm.
And some
torture. Yeah.
And some miracle, he escaped. And then what happened with that boy, and he came to America, and I mean, it's an unbelievable story. And this story about this poor Mickey, I don't know if that right. It sounds similar. He's but he didn't have the same outcome as the boy in the Song of Ascents book, did he?
Now I'm going to take this to a different spot, if you don't mind. My father was a World War II vet. And, he was on the water. He was in the Philippines, so he was far from where we're talking. Well, not too far from where we're talking about now. But, Jim is boots on the ground. And I think when we can, especially in these times in 2023, 24, these times, we can take a look at history and learn from it. We can get a whiff of where we might be going because of it. We have a relatively young country. We're talking about an ancient country with Japan and ancient history. But humanity is humanity. And once again, Jim is in the arena. And when I read about this, I went into the arena as best I could, and as much as I like to do it. And as a football coach, and we like to joke around about having my master's in dirt, and I enjoy being in the dirt. Now, I think that's where we need to go as a culture, is into the humanity more than ever before. We did an episode last week on artificial intelligence, right? So here we are in the dirt. Let's go to the dirt for a minute, the Catholic Church. It seems to me over the last year or so, Catholicism has sprung up within World War II in me a few times. We had Dachau. I didn't know there were so many Catholics that were, in the Holocaust, and they were sent to Dachau. And we have Maximilian Kolbe for his, martyr-like heroism that turned into his martyrdom in taking the bullet for a guy. But going back to the history of what we're talking about here today, we're talking about St. Francis Xavier buddied up 2 by 2 to some degree with Ignatius of Loyola in bringing the Jesuits into Japan. So we have the feet on the ground that really brings us to Nagasaki and what Jim's talking about today. It's the humanity of it. I also want to bring one more touch to this, and I wish if we were going to go to the militaristic side as much as we did, which I really love, then I would have done more homework on this. But we did a veterans retreat down in South Jersey at Discovery House for our suffering veterans, and for those who were there to give and help heal others and heal by doing so themselves. And there was a man that wrote a heck of a book. He might have passed since then, but I think he was 92, and it was only 2 years ago. He wrote the book on the fact that he was commanded to fly the flight, to make the flight over Hiroshima or Nagasaki. I believe it was Hiroshima. And he refused to go. He refused to take the flight. And he wrote the book on that, the repercussions of such, and all the terms that Jim would know that would happen to a man that would completely deny a command like that. Those are the things that I am so intrigued with, but I did not know what Jim just told me. And if I had known that, how can I say this right? I get emotional thinking about it. There's no right way to say it, but Nagasaki and Hiroshima was absolutely deplorable, immense beyond words, but I had no idea how much more was going on before that. You hear what I'm saying? I don't know what that means. But the boot guys with the boots on the ground, Jim's father, Jim, the Brotherhood, with all those that have boots on the ground, that's where the true stories lie. And we don't get that. We don't get that. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Colby. He now a saint, of course, but he founded a monastery in Nagasaki.
They're the boots on the ground. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Keep going.
He's, so it's, you want to talk about getting it done. He did it, and he wasn't, obviously he was long after St. Francis Xavier, but this is, you had the imperial government was so concerned about the rapid growth of Christianity and Catholicism, especially, that they put out the order: you got to suppress it by any means necessary. And I read the book The Rape of Nanking, other stories about how brutal the Imperial Japan could be. Jim, go.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go.
More to say? No. Well, I just I had started studying martial arts with my father when I was 7 years old. So I figure I'm almost 70 now. That's how long I've been involved in it, and I know a lot about the Asian warrior mentality. The code of Bushido. And you have to understand, you're talking about feudal Japan when Xavier was there. You're talking about the 1500s. That was a violent, repressed. There was no court of appeals there. It was as down and dirty as you could possibly be. And I think about him, and I think about who they called the Black Robes, the Jesuits who went into North America. What they faced, as brutal, but not on a systematic scale. And Japan at that time was ruled by shoguns and warlords. They each had their little areas, and they ruled with an iron fist. And when the order went out to, you have to repress this, there was no questioning that.
Oh no. No, I mean,
when it was violent, it was done violently. It wasn't like you got to stop doing this. It was like put your head on the block and cut it off. I
think that would be the nicest way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the case of Nikki was.
They're very skilled at stringing out your death. Let's put it that way. They're very skilled at it. They know how to make it very long and very painful.
There is a book, and from which a movie was made, and I didn't read the book. Silence. That's the name of the book, is Silence, and it's the name of the movie. And the movie had Liam Neeson in it, but he didn't have the most prominent part. But it was the story of almost exactly this. And these guys, one of the ways they either boiled them alive, attach them to stakes, or a cross, wait for the tide to come in. Brutal.
Yeah.
So I think that, but in that group, and we mentioned his name before, Paul Miki. I wonder whether that's a abbreviated last name, but he was among a group. He was of converts. His family was of wealth, and but they were rounded up. And in this one roundup of whatever it was, a few dozen people, clergy, altar boys, civilians, they're just followers of the way. They were marched. They had there's a reference to they had their Via Dolorosa, their walk to Calvary. It reminded me, I don't know whether you remember actually it was our first retreat at Discovery House in October 2020 when I talked about the nuns of Compiègne, the martyrs of Compiègne, and how they sang hymns along the way. Well, I was moved greatly by reading how Paul Miki and his group were singing hymns and prayers, saying prayers along the way. And just like the nuns of Compiègne, they were jeered at, they were hit, they were tortured along the way. And then they get to their destination. And it's, I would say their destiny, because it was all over, and it was a violent, horrible death with the use of lances, without getting into any more detail. And it brings to the point of, in that story, silence, but also the silence was just a story of what was happening, and what was happening at the time of Francis Xavier, and what we're talking about here in Nagasaki was the test to find out whether you were a believer. And, right, Dan?
Yeah. And once again, going back to reconnecting with my previous thought, and I think it's, as we start to wind down a little bit here, I know Jim would absolutely agree that there's a brotherhood that's formed. In fact, we opened the show with a joke, but it was true. We talked about being ex-teammates. We're not ex-teammates. We're always teammates. And the brotherhood of something that is really rich and deep, you never give up that brotherhood. Whether you ever meet the guy or not, you're brothers, you know? So like an eternity before, eternity after, what that means, what that meant is the truth, how it touches the heart and truth of our manly hearts in this case, will always be brothers. So Jim, I think, can always say, and God wants us to come into the present. He wants Peter next to us. He wants James the Greater next to us. And the brothers in this story that belong to us, and the brothers that Jim had with boots on the ground, are all in this right now in the present. You know, St. Francis Xavier, Ignatius of Loyola, who's coming to Discovery House with us on Saturday, right, Tom? Mm-hmm. Aren't you bringing Ignatius with us? So you're bringing them with us, and now we've come to know Paul Miki, and so true, right, Jim? It's so true, right? And yeah, but we have to really recognize them as our brothers and brother up with them here in spirit at all times. You know, we really have to go to them in order to sort this out. If we deny them, we'll never figure it out, because there's comfort in that in the teammanship, but there's also, you know, like, there's also struggles in there too, right? Yeah. And we're not living if we're not struggling, right? If life was easy, it would be boring, you know? Yeah. So
beauty and brokenness. You know, talking about Ignatius.
It's the crucifix. Go ahead.
It's he's real when he writes about beauty and brokenness. The beauty doesn't capture me as much as the brokenness, and that's because, you know, I've said many times on this program and elsewhere that I'm not a big I don't care for pious platitudes. I'm not denigrating them. They just don't do anything for me. So I think that, you know, with the brokenness, it ties back to, and your comment, Dan, about the connectedness. When in going through next week is my last class in the 9-month spiritual exercise training program, and what I learned this particular week was what Ignatius wrote was that he didn't know about the Big Bang, but it's referenced in the book that we are all made of elements from the Big Bang. Mm. And when I read that, and I thought about it, and I prayed on it, it blew my mind to think that this, I mean, it's, you know, remember, man, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. But we didn't really stop to think, what's in that dust? I mean, you take a scoop of my soil in the backyard, you know, I said soil, not dirt, right? You see the elements that are in that we all need to live. I don't grow any food for two-legged creatures out there. They all have a lot more legs than I have. But I know that that's feeding creation, and it's the same soil from the Big Bang when God created everything. And a Catholic, I think a Jesuit, I'll have to confirm this, I believe it was Father Lemaitre, who, we'll say, discovered the Big Bang. So the connectedness, our connectedness, you got to take it from the abstract, like Dan says and emphasizes, the boots in the ground, being in the dirt, in that soil, and saying, okay, are you in this with me? Will you get dirty with me? That's what matters to me. That connectedness is no longer the abstract. You know, if I have blood, sweat, and tears, if you guys have blood, sweat, and tears, doesn't matter as long as we can have them together in a righteous cause.
Well said. There's no time for pious platitudes when you're about to go downrange, right, Jim?
No, sir. No, sir.
And we are downrange.
One thing I think about as we get older and the world keeps spinning apart, you know, right in front of our eyes is, you know, there's not enough guys down in the dirt with us. You know, we need more We need more guys down in the dirt with us.
Well, don't forget, we also have to work on the premise that we are enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I do.
You're amazing, Jim. I really appreciate what you shared with us today. You've been there, man, and you brought us to. You brought us into your present. Brought us into your present.
Dan, we got to wrap this up, but I want to ask you on We Are Enough. Is it enough to say we're going to move the chains and we take it 1 yard at a time? We take it 10 yards at a time?
Yep.
Yep.
Do our job while we're here. Run the race. Take care of our business. And he'll say, "You are my son, with whom I'm well pleased." That's all we need to hear. In the end. Yeah.
That's a good way to end it, Dan. It's a good way to end it.
All right, guys. Danny, what's coming up next?
Stay tuned, folks, for The Angelus and Your Prayer Intentions with Peter and Jimmy.
WQPHradio.org. Tell a friend. Do we have any enemies? Probably. Tell them. And God bless Mary Ann, Gene, James, Tom, and the crew. We love doing this. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, guys. Good being with you again.
Yeah, amen. Back at you.
God bless you, Danny.
God bless you, Tommy. God bless you all.
God bless everybody.
You are listening to WQPH 89.3 FM Shirley, Fitchburg. And now a word from author Peter and Jimmy, who is the host of Your Prayer Intentions, taking place every Saturday at 12:30 p.m.
Whether you're donating money or giving us prayers, without you, we don't go on. And if you do want to help us go on, please consider going to WQPHradio.org. There's a donate button there. You can give once, you can give monthly, and it makes a difference. It keeps all of our shows, and we have a great lineup of shows, keeps us going. And whether you're a fan of Your Prayer Intentions, whether you like Steve's show, Benedict's Harris Sundays at midnight, whether you like Brother Matthew and Brother Anthony from the Housetops, which is on Sundays 10:30 a.m. and 4 p.m., whether you're a fan of the Children's Rosary, which we have every day at 5 p.m., 7 days a week, whether you like our Local Matters show, which is Saturday at 11, or Talk Catholic, which comes right after us at 12:30, Larry's Music Off Sunday at 11 a.m., we have the Shepherd's Pie Saturdays at 1 p.m., or Dan and Tom with the 13th Apostle, which comes just before us at 11:30. Any of those shows and all the stuff you donate, you help these things come out. But what's also at the WQPH website, in addition to podcasts of our shows, is the prayer wall.
Right on the prayer wall, support WQPH and get WQPH 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on WQPHradio.org.
Thank you for listening to the 13th Apostle with Dan Duddy and Tom Caffrey. For more information on Dan, visit his website at www.danduddy.com or email dcduddy@gmail.com. Tom's website is faithpilgrims.com or email trcaffrey@faithpilgrims.com. How about you? Will you be the 13th Apostle?